Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a lesson for you doing this rose in watercolor, and I thought it would be fun to share a real-time tutorial. So I'm starting off here. I've been experimenting with kind of bolder pencil lines, and I'm using this this pencil. It's a 2mm pencil. It came in a set from Mr. Pen. I'll try to find it and link it down below in case you are interested in something like that. But it was a set of mechanical pencils that had like everything from like a 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, and I think a 0.9 and a 2mm mechanical pencil, and it came with refills for the smaller sizes. I can't remember if I had refills for the 2mm one or not, and replacement erasers. And I love this little set of pencils. I find the 0.3s a little too fine for me, and I've been experimenting with bold pencil strokes, so I really wanted to sketch this rose with the thicker lead. I am sketching fairly lightly because I am working in my on my watercolor paper, and I don't want to have to do a bunch of erasing. And there is a speck of paint on this paper. You can kind of see it next to my hand there. I'll be able to scrub that out, luckily. I must have gotten it on my sketchbook page when I was out painting the other day, but I didn't want to waste those pages, and I figured, I mean, I wasn't that... I don't know. I didn't plan on spending a huge amount of time on this, so I figured it would be fine. And this took me about 48 minutes to do, so you're watching it in real time. The camera did shut off at one point, but I only missed like a minute of footage, so luckily that was okay. But I thought this was pretty nice for a 1 hour long painting, and I thought you might enjoy seeing it. So the drawing here, when I'm working on like scrap paper, or I'm just kind of like practicing my drawing, what I will do is I will start with a large shape to encompass the entire thing I'm drawing, and then I will divide it up into its smaller parts and kind of refine as I go. But when I'm sketching on my like good art paper, like this is actually this sketchbook I made out of Hanamula Cezanne paper, 100% cotton paper. It's very similar to Arches. When I'm sketching on my good art paper that I'm going to paint on, especially with watercolor, because you know you'll be able to see any sort of Mars you make on the paper, I will tend to start like in the center and work my way out. And that just eliminates the amount of erasing. So I have to make sure I'm feeling pretty warmed up in order to do that. Otherwise, I might make some errors and have to do a lot of erasing. But I just try to kind of keep my place. But with a flower, if you end up with an extra petal, or the petal's a little bit different than the photo, it's not a big deal. So a technique like this works pretty well. And I'm also going to be balancing things out, like putting like a couple leaves towards the top of the flower to balance out the ones that I'm going to sketch in the bottom of the flower. And I'm basically just going to try to fill this page of my sketchbook a little bit intentionally, you know, rather than just by going what's on my phone screen. I took this photo. It was so pretty. They had this these roses growing between the pickets of a white fence on Mohegan Island, and I thought this was so lovely that I took a photo. I love roses anyway, especially the like English roses and like rosebush roses and even beach roses. I don't know why, I just love that. They're more like informal, I guess, than long stem roses, which I find to be a little bit not as fun to draw. I find them a little bit more boring to draw. I find like the English roses and the roses on a bush to be very wild and interesting and loose, and so that's why I was sketching that here. I also really loved the dead, like the roses that had gone by, those 3 dead rosebuds there. So I wanted to get those into the composition as well, because I feel like they add a nice contrast between the fresh new rose and then the old decaying rose. I just think it's kind of adds different colors, different textures, and helps bring the eye through the scene. So when you are composing your picture, look for things that are interesting and not perfect, because a lot of times in a composition, it's going to be the imperfections that make it look realistic. It's going to be the leaf with a hole in it. It's going to be the petal that's got the little rusty edge to it. It's going to be the things that are not perfect that's going to draw your eye in. Now we're also going to be painting white flowers here. So if you look at that white flower, you can see bits of pink. You can see bits of purple and blue in the shadow. So what I do when I'm painting a white flower, especially if I'm keeping a dark background, is I am going to look for any of those color notes and those color nuances and really push it. So when I mean, you probably saw the photo in the thumbnail, we end up with a more colorful kind of pastel-y, rainbowy rose a little bit, but it still reads as white because the colors were there. I just amplified them a little bit. Now, as you can see, I took my time on this drawing, but we'll have the drawing done in like another few seconds. It's spending a focused 5 minutes on a drawing is so much better than trying to go right in there with detail right off the bat and then getting everything all out of proportion. It was a fairly loose drawing, but it was fairly accurate. Now here I'm using my scrubber brush to scrub out that paint that I somehow dropped on that page earlier. So what you do is you wet the little scrubber brush and you brush over the area, kind of scrub it gently, and then press it. Don't rub, but press it with a paper towel. And you can remove a lot of stains that way, especially if it's like a sedimentary color. I'm pretty sure that was like some burnt sienna that I had dropped on that page. Because I had been using that on a painting on the previous page. But yeah, the little scrubber brushes, you want to make sure you get the kind that are made out of golden Taklon but not the stiff nylon ones. Royal and Langnickel make, my favorite one actually that they have is from the Nocturna Pro line. Their scrubber brush there, but they also have them in the more affordable Zen and Menta lines. It doesn't really matter which one you buy it from. They're basically really short filberts made of like a softer synthetic hair. They're kind of like your typical golden Taklon brush, but those are so great for lifting out highlights, for fixing mistakes, and the brushes are designed for that, so you're not wearing down like the chisel edge of a flat brush to do that lifting. So highly recommended. You can pick them up for, I don't know, $5, less sometimes at Blick, or big box stores will often have them. And you don't need many. I like to have a couple sizes. I think I have a 2, 4, and a 6, and that's really wonderful. It's wonderful to have them. They might even go up as big as an 8, but just a really good recommendation. So the brush I'm using here is actually one of my brushes from my line with Craft Ammo. It will be re-released. We went through some testing with some different ferrules and glues to make sure, and crimping to make sure that we're getting a really solid crimp there. Because the bristles are great. The bristles were always great, but we did have some issues with ferrules getting loose. So I wanted to make sure that was rectified if we were ever going to re-release them. So you can look for those soon. I'm not exactly sure when they're going to be out, but we have been looking. We had been working on that for oh gosh, about 6 months, I think. So what I'm using here is a color called Peach Light, and this is from the Paul Rubens new floral pan set. Now it's a new set of colors, but it is the first generation Paul Rubens pans, it seems to me anyway, but going by the wrapper and the way they paint out. And the thing I've painted that I've liked the most of these paints have been this. It's definitely a set for floral pictures. I have done other subject matter with these, and I just released a review on this. If you're more curious about that set, I would highly recommend you watch the review before you buy it, just to make sure it is going to meet your needs. But I was using the let's see, I used some of the Opera, or they call it Peach Light, and it's a granulating pink. It has quite a heavy texture to it. Some of the Cobalt Teal, or they call it Turquoise Light, I think. And I think that's, did I grab any of the purple? I think that's just the Cobalt Teal with the pink. I'm grabbing a little bit of Hansa Lemon here and adding that in to kind of just bring in some warmth. But I was really curious how those granulating colors would look on a flower petal. I thought it might be a little much to have that texture in there, but I actually ended up really liking it. And I was able to glaze over shadows and everything, and I didn't have any problems with that. But I kind of wanted to make sure I did at least one flower with this set, since it is a floral set. And I did like how it painted for this, but for other subjects, it was not my favorite set. But I do like the paints, just this particular iteration of a set. Unless you're a floral painter, I probably wouldn't recommend it. There are some interesting colors in here that are really nice for mixing, like their nickel, what are they called? Nickel azo yellow. It's like a green gold type of color, or it's like it's a really, really strong transparent yellow. I'm using it right up there. It almost looks like an Arulian, honestly. So it's a really nice mixer. It's a little strong on its own, but it's kind of fun to like put that color on its own on the paper and kind of paint an area, and then come back in with other colors to drop into it, and then see them kind of blend and merge together. I didn't have any issues with how the paint moved. Paul Rubens paints generally are not the heaviest, don't have the heaviest movement to them, but I don't use their paint and think, oh, these paints don't move at all. So I don't know. I guess I work fine for my style. And that's looking a little bright to me. I will need to tone that down a little bit. And I think I did that by adding a little bit of Oh, like a brown. I think I added a little brown to that one. I should have had the palette a little more visible, but I wanted to have my reference photo and phone in the shot too. Decisions, right? So last week when I did the bird painting, I asked if people liked this narrated version, real time versus a time-lapse version. And for the most part, I think everyone said they preferred the real time version. Even though, gosh, it seems like I'm painting so slow, when I have to talk and do it at the same time, I paint slower. I don't know, or maybe I have to spend a lot of time fixing mistakes because I make hasty mistakes when I'm trying to talk and paint at the same time. I'm not sure, but the full time that it takes me to paint something, I'm quicker if I paint it and focus and then go back in and narrate. So I'll be doing that for some of my tutorials, not all of them, but I thought this would be a good one for it since it's not really super long. I like it when I have a base of color and then I can go in and hidden edge with a little bit of a darker color and let it bleed in. This is a really humid season for us here in Maine. Summer is very humid, and this is cotton paper, and I find that the paper stays wet quite a long time versus like in the winter when we're running heaters and things like that and the air is really dry. So techniques like this are really, really wonderful to do in the summer if you have a humid environment. And you can kind of see that, what I was telling you about adding the darker colors to the edge and just letting the color wick in a bit. It's a pretty effect, I think. And if you can let your paint mix on the paper sometimes, it will give you a fresher look. So that's something I hear a lot. I have students and viewers that will be asking me, how can I loosen up? How can I get that freshness in my painting? And I think when they say, how do I loosen up? They're not wanting to paint more sloppily. They want to have that kind of freshness, but they want to have it a little bit, but they still want that control. And this is the best way to do it because the paint's only going to go where the paper's wet. So if you have like an area base coated in with a light color or just a pure pigment of one color and then you charge in with another color, you're going to get that really vibrant, fresh mixing on the paper. But you're still going to keep those defined, crisp edges. So you've got a really nice balance of something being the paint going where you want it, but the paint feeling like it's effortless, right? It's like when you watch somebody who's been figure skating, right? You watch a figure skating competition or ice dancing or something like that, and the performers, the athletes, it looks so effortless, right? Like ballroom dancing looks so effortless. But you know, if it was someone that was a beginner, it would look very different. It would be very kind of herky-jerky, and it would not look so calm and effortless. And the more you paint, the more you're going to get that effortless look to your work with it still looking kind of loose and simple. But simple isn't easy, okay? I think there's this kind of like misconception that loose painting is a lot easier than tight painting. But I think a lot of the loose painters that people emulate are actually, they've detailed a certain area, and that's nice and sharp and crisp. But then they've done a lot of letting the paint flow in a loose yet controlled way. And it gives you the impression of it being loose, but actually there's plenty of structure there. It's the paint is moving loosely within the structure. Now that area there, see where the leaf just magically appeared, that's where my camera had shut off and I forgot to start it back up again. And I'll tell you what I did there. I wet the leaf with a really watery mix of the nickel yellow, and then I added some of the cobalt teal to the top of that. And now I'm adding in some of I think they called it emerald green light, but it's basically a phthalo green yellow shade. And I'm adding in some of the hooker's green there. And I'm just basically letting the colors mix and mingle within that wet leaf. I also went around the edges of the leaf with what was that green? Olive green. So when I saw the greens in the set, I was like, I wonder why they're going with these greens. Why don't they have tree green in there? Tree green is Paul Rubens' version of sap green, because I thought, that's such a pretty green. Why didn't they put that in there? Why did they put these other greens instead? But looking at that leaf, I do like that combination that they offer, and I do feel like it's quite versatile for floral painters. So it might be kind of a little bit of a different palette than what you would be accustomed to for floral painting, but I do like it. I actually am not completely unfamiliar with this range of paint because they had a tube set several years ago that had these exact same colors and that I really liked. I'm very lightly dragging with a credit card scraper here to put some subtle veining in here because, again, keeping with that loose feeling, I wanted to get those really fine lines in there and not have a lot of, not have to fuss with it too much. But go with a really light touch here. If you scrape too firmly, you're going to have really dark lines, and also, it's hard to keep as fluid of a movement in your hand when you're scraping really hard. It does not take a lot of pressure to scar the surface of wet paper so that you can get that effect with your credit card scraper. And I know probably if you've been here for a while, you've seen me use them before, but literally they're pieces of gift cards and credit cards that have been cut up into, wedges, and that you just use them to scrape marks into wet paint or to pick up paint and do like textures like birch tree, scraping for birch tree and rocks and things like that. So just a very versatile tool, and I recommend having them everywhere you paint. Honestly, I should tuck a few in every paint palette just so I have them. So I'm really loosely painting in this cluster of leaves here. I'm not planning on doing a ton of detail on them. I just want to kind of bring in some more greens and just fill in this bottom space a little bit. And I'm just kind of thinking of what I want my main color to be, what other colors might want to charge into it. And because I have a lot of juicy paint on my palette, I'm just going right in on the wet paper and kind of base coating in my shape. And then I can charge in more color if I want it, or shadows or whatever I want while the paint's still wet. The nice thing about it being kind of the humid season is that I don't have to be hasty and I don't have to rush when I'm trying to decide what I want to add into my color. Now, if you're watching this somewhere where it is very dry and you're like, that would never work for me, what you can do, and probably I wouldn't recommend doing this in a sketchbook, but if you had a sheet of paper, I would wet the back of the paper and stick it to a piece of plexiglass and paint on that, just like we're painting here. Just having that moisture there at the back of the paper, it's not going to be, you'll still have crisp lines on the front of your paper, but it's going to have, it's going to keep a little bit more, it's going to keep your paint where you wet the front of the paper, it's going to keep those areas wetter longer. And it should actually help it from buckling too. Now you could wet the entire sheet front and back side. I do that sometimes, especially if I'm going to be doing a big wet into wet background. You can either just brush wet it, like with a big wet brush, or you could dip it in water, do it that way too. But that's a really nice way to keep it from buckling and to keep your paper wet longer so you can get the blending effects that you want. I have a couple tutorials on my YouTube channel for this. One is a duck and one is it's like a bridge in a city with like cherry blossoms, and that one is really, I think they're both pretty good at demonstrating that technique, but I really like the bridge with the cherry blossoms the most. It was a really fun painting to do, and it's a great technique for if you're struggling with your paper drying too quickly. I paint in a sketchbook a lot, so this it being humid out just works really well for this. Now here you can see I'm putting in the credit card scraping again. And you can also see how I varied the tone on that big leaf just by putting in some more of the hooker's green, just to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of interest. And I can, you can think about it. You don't have to rush, right? And I find that when I'm painting and really just focusing on the painting rather than trying to describe what I'm doing, I have that time to think and focus, because I can take risks a little bit better when I'm doing that. If I'm talking about it while I'm doing it, I really don't want to mess it up or tell you the wrong thing. But then afterwards, I can think about it and I can tell you, okay, yeah, that worked out really well, or you know what I mean? I know what's going to happen, basically. So I'm glad that you guys like this format. Hopefully it helps you when you give some of these projects a try. On the day this is coming out, I think you're actually going to be I think it's going to be an Amazon Prime Day. I believe they're Tuesday and Wednesday this week, and I believe this is publishing on a Wednesday. So if you were interested in any of the Paul Rubens paints, they are going to be participating in the Prime Day sales pretty heavily. I'm not sure if you have to be a Prime member to get their sales or not, but I just want to give you the heads up in case you were looking to grab some stuff. I always post a list on my YouTube community tab where I will hunt down things that I personally recommend that are on sale, because I know they recommend a lot of things, or the things that go on sale a lot of times on Prime Days are the white labeled stuff that are of questionable value or quality. So if I haven't used it, I'm not going to link to it. And if it's not something I recommend, I'm not going to link to it. I mean, it might even be perfectly fine, but if I don't like it, I mean, I'm not gonna recommend it, because I kind of am responsible if I recommend something and you don't like it or it doesn't perform the way it's supposed to. So, but of course you can do whatever you want. You buy whatever you want, or buy nothing, or avoid the list completely. That's totally fine. I think it's kind of fun to shape the leaves too when you're doing this with paint. Having just a basic pencil sketch gives you a little bit of framework and a little bit of, it gives you a little bit of security, but then you can go in and kind of adjust your shapes a little bit with the paint. And I think that's really kind of fun. It gives you a little bit of additional chance to draw and express yourself into the painting process. And of course, I mean, if you're uncomfortable drawing, you could always transfer a picture. You could print out a photograph and trace it. You could use a light box, whatever, projector, whatever you have. I enjoy drawing, but I know not everybody does. Something else you can do is look for, and this is a really good option if you're looking for really nice illustrations that you could paint, would be to look for public domain botanical illustrations. They might even call it vintage botanical clip art. And there's so many out there, so many websites that just provide this sort of thing for free in a lot of cases. Or like the Dover books or the Taschen books will have lots of books with plates in there that you can use. Something like that would give you a really nice framework. So say you want to paint a rose like this, but you don't feel up to drawing it, you can find a similar rose that you could trace, and then you could go ahead and paint it from there. Because I know it takes time to learn how to draw, and you may not have very much time. You may just want to paint and enjoy your paints and have a nice project to do. And if that's what you want to do, you should do it. I am adding a couple leaves up here to give a little balance and a little bit of definition to that top edge of the flower. Sometimes you want to do things for your composition, things that aren't necessarily there in the picture. But if you can look around, like this is a picture I zoomed in on, I can zoom out, look at other flowers, see how I may have a leaf popping out from behind a flower. And something like that, especially when you have a light color flower on a white background, being able to pull in things around the edges can give you that little bit of definition here and there, so you have a little bit more crispness. Now, I do like how you can have kind of lost and found and softer edges by not having a high contrast edge all the way around the flower. But this is just a nice way to kind of pick up that definition, so we kind of know where the flower ends, and I think it looks nice. It also looks nice to have a little bit of that green, that heavy green color popping up in different parts of the picture as well, so you have a little bit more balance. Overall, we have more weight at the bottom of the picture with that big cluster of leaves, so that is nice and appealing to look at, but it's nice to also have a little bit of an anchor here and there, so our eyes will kind of float around the picture. We'll see the darker leaves at the top, we'll see the little dead flowers, we'll see the swoop of the leaves at the bottom, and then we can pull our focus back up onto the flower, the large focal flower. So think about that as you're working, creating a balance around the composition, so nothing feels like it's off, like you've got too much over here and not enough over there, or you don't have enough interest in different portions of the picture. It's nice to have a clear focal point, which in this case would be the flower that we haven't spent too much time on yet, but you want to have these other kind of supporting roles that are going to draw attention and complement your focal point. And nature's great at that, right? We look at nature and we see things that are pleasing. And sometimes we don't really know why we like the look of it or why it's pleasing or nice to look at. But if you start to think about your different elements of design, like, okay, do we have a pattern here? Do we have rhythm? Do we have movement? Do we have whatever our lines like? And what sort of rhythm do these lines have? Like with a flower, you've got these petals that are kind of building out around a center point. You've got this repetition that's really pleasant, but each petal's a little different, so it's not completely repetitive. Think about those different elements while you're creating to see if you can spot what makes a composition good, and then you'll know how to use those ideas in your next painting. This little dead flower here actually has a couple petals clinging on versus the higher two that have just a couple leaves there. So I wanted to kind of do this on its own a little bit later. And I'm starting off kind of the same way by dabbing in or stippling in the like the stamens there. And I'm also bringing some of that color up there because I wasn't sure if I had enough. I want them to feel like they're sisters, not twins, basically. I want them to be related to one another, but not carbon copies of each other. And I also wanted some of the color to leach down into the petals from the middle. And you'll see kind of how I pull that color down there in a second. I tend to bounce around a lot when I'm working on a painting rather than just kind of starting at one side of the paper and working my way across. And the reason for that is so that you don't end up with one area overdone and then you lose your steam before you finish up the other area. I kind of like to work on all areas at the same time. And it also gives my eyes a break. So if I've been working on, say, a leaf and then before I'm finished with that, I hop over and work on another portion like a petal or stamen or something, then it gives my eyes a chance to have a break from the leaf. And then when I come back and I look at the leaf, I'm going to be able to evaluate a little bit better whether it is done or not. So that's why I like to do that. So I wet the petals there and I'm dropping in a little bit of the turquoise light, aka cobalt teal. And I'm going to put in some other colors too. So I've got a really kind of like a very, very pale yellow here. I want to make sure that these petals are very light. Now that is way too dark there. So I'm going to pull some of that out. So don't panic. If you put something on your paper and you're like, oh, yikes, that's way too dark, especially if you have a nice quality watercolor paper, don't panic. Just rinse your brush off, dab off the excess water, put the brush back into the area and lift out that color. Your clean brush will drink up that excess color. So see, now it is calm, now it is fine, there was no need to panic, and we have a soft little petal there. I'm going to want to add a little bit of pink into the petals too, so, and you can kind of see it on the reference photo. I'm just kind of dabbing in some of that little pink area that you see, and yes, I am pushing the color a bit, and I am kind of making this an idealized dead flower rather than completely, past. I like finding the beautiful parts of the decay basically and bringing that in, and it's your painting. You can idealize it as much as you want, or you can make it as realistic as you want, or you can, do something completely different. We all have our own style. And I think it's really important to explore what attracts you to a subject. So maybe you're grabbing my reference photo. It's up on my Instagram account, by the way. Any of those reference photos I post on my Instagram account, please feel free to work from them and then use the hashtag sketchbookfloozy or tag me so I can see what you've made. I posted up there to share. I've benefited from the work of so many photographers that have shared their work freely on Unsplash and Pixabay that I just want to give back to the art community as well. But I'm not as good of a photographer as they are, so I don't want to post on those kind of semi-professional sites. But if you can get use from it, please do get use from it. Now I'm moving back onto the big flower and adding some details. I'm using some of that brown color from the dead flower stamen area and adding that into the center of the big flower. And again, that's going to kind of cross-pollinate all of our elements, and it would be the same color. Anyway, it's the same part of the flower's from the same plant. So I wanted to get that in first. And that's going to establish a little bit of a value range because I know that area is probably the darkest area of that flower. Maybe some of the deeper shadows would be a little bit darker, but that's pretty much the darkest area. Now we begin the shading portion of the flower. So I've wet one of the petals just with clear water, and I'm picking up a mix of the cobalt teal and indigo, and I'm just dabbing that kind of into the darkest shadow area and letting it kind of fade out a bit. Now, Paul Rubens watercolors do not have tons and tons of flow, but it does kind of breathe out into a natural rouging or shadow there. But obviously you can use whatever brand you have, but if you do find that you're getting a lot more whoosh or a lot more flow, then you may need to go back in with a clean damp brush and kind of lift out overflow if that's if you're having that issue. Now here I'm just going to spread it out a little bit with a clean damp brush. Now you can use two brushes for this and have a brush for applying color and a brush for blending color out or softening color a little bit too if you want to. Not necessary, but as you get the hang of this technique, you're not going to need to fuss with it too much. It's going to become very much second nature. Now I want to be really careful not to disturb the granulation underneath there in those pinks because I think it's kind of pretty and unusual visual. So I just made sure not to overwork an area. And once I had an area shaded, I went to another petal. Now here I realized I had a couple petals here that I did not paint at all. And I think why I hadn't was because I wasn't quite sure if they were petals or they were leaves, or maybe I sketched them in towards the end. I can't remember, but I decided they were petals and I needed to get a kind of like a base color on there. So I'm starting just by wetting those those petals that are just the blank paper with water. I'm using one of my craft demo brushes, by the way. That's the round there, the Taklon round. And I'm going to go in with a shadow color because these two petals are going to be darker. So I'm doing the indigo plus a little bit of the pink color that I was using, plus a little bit of brown from the centers. And this is just going to give me kind of like a natural gray that will match because it is colors that I've used. I'm only repeating colors here. So for colors on this set that I've used so far, I've used like the nickel yellow. I've used the peach light, which is an opera pink color. I've used cobalt teal, or turquoise light as they call it. I've used did I say the peach light or opera already? And I also used a kind of like a pinky red. It's almost like a Quin Rose color, but not quite as pink. I can't remember what their name for it was. Might have been rose red. I'm not sure. But anyways, it's just kind of like a slightly cool, deeper red color. And then I think I've used all the greens that were in the set. But yeah, I mean, I just keep recycling those colors because I did use a lemon yellow from there too. I just keep recycling those colors because that's how you get harmony. And when you start adding lots and lots of colors that you haven't mixed yourself, you don't know what the base pigments in those colors are. Like you get a set of like 168 colors and you're just using whatever color is closest to what you want rather than mixing the colors that you want. It can turn out beautiful. I'm not saying that it won't, but chances are it's going to look a little off, like it's going to look a little amateurish because the colors won't necessarily coordinate. They just won't go together as well because you're not mixing them from the same base ingredients. It's kind of like, I don't know, say you're making a meal and you've got 5 chefs creating a dish. And each chef is a complete different set of ingredients and they're all making their thing and then they plop it all together on a plate. They might be great together, but they might be completely off. You'd want to kind of keep, somebody might have, Mexican spices. Somebody else might have Italian spices. Somebody else might have Indian spices. And then they each make these individually delicious things that are beautiful, but you put them on the plate, they just don't go together. That's what can happen with your paintings as well. So, even if you have a huge set of paints, I would try to stick to, 6 or fewer colors. Just pare it down so that you're repeating the same colors over and over again. It's just like if you were decorating a room. If you were decorating a room, you wouldn't have 168 colors, right? You would pick probably a main color, a secondary color, and an accent color. You might have like a neutral and a main color and an accent color. You wouldn't want to be in a room that had that many colors, or it would just be overwhelming, right? It would be like living in a Disney Channel TV show. It would just be too much. The same thing with the painting. So if you love your palettes with tons and tons of colors, hey, I understand. I have a lot of colors in my collection. That's fine. Just don't use them all in one painting if you want to have a more sophisticated look to your paint. If you don't care about that, if you want to have a more like wild and playful and illustrative look, then by all means, use whatever you want. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I will explain why things may look a certain way so that you can choose to lean into that and go for it, or you can choose to lean back from it and go for a more subtle approach. There are times where you want a more, I don't want to say obnoxious, but you want a more aggressive look in your art, and you want those really contrasting colors. You might even want some clashing colors depending on what you're trying to convey, and that's fine. I just think knowing how you achieve those feelings in your work is helpful. So I'm not judging anybody's work or how they choose to create. I'm just hopefully adding a little food for thought and maybe some tips on how you can get the look that you want to get, however that is. Because there's all kinds of art, right? We're all different. We're all going to make different things. So yeah, this is going to be kind of tedious. We're going to keep on shading individual petals. This is real time. It's not exciting. This would be the stuff that you would typically see in time lapse. But if you saw this in time lapse, you may not understand exactly what I'm doing. And So, or how long that water's sitting on the paper before I add the paint to it. So if you're bored out of your mind, you want to hit the gear button on the player and speed me up 2 times, that's totally fine. If you want to just listen to a podcast and peek up at the screen every once in a while, that's fine too. But I'll leave it in here for anybody that wants to see how long it takes, basically. I want to talk about brushes a little bit. And I'm just going to talk about random art stuff, I guess, for the duration here, unless something that I'm doing is really something I want to make a note of. When you have a good round brush, this is, I would say round as number 12, golden Taklon brush. When you have a brush that has a really sharp point on it, you can use that brush for, if it's a big brush with a sharp point, you can use it for so many things. You can get a fine detail with it, and you can get a wide wash with it. The only thing that's not really good for is if you need to put like a little whisker of a mark in there and you don't want a lot of water, because sometimes with these brushes, because I use synthetic brushes because I don't want to contribute to the fur trade, when you're using a synthetic brush, it will drop your water sometimes unexpectedly, and a big brush is going to hold way more water than like a little liner. So if you just want to do a little whisker or a little eyelash or something, I would say at that point get a smaller brush, like a small liner, a small spot or something like that, because that way you won't end up with an unusual or a surprising gush of water coming out of the brush. But say you're doing long, really skinny lines for a boat or something, you could do that with this brush. You could do fine details with this brush, especially if you're a fast painter. But if you're a slower painter and you just need a tiny little bit of paint, use a smaller brush. But in general, using the larger brush for whenever you can, you're going to build better habits and better brush control. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Plus, you can have fewer brushes if you can get more use out of that bigger one with a sharp point. Now, eventually, you'll wear down that brush. You'll wear down the point. It'll still be good for big washes and for a lot of basic techniques, but you might wear down that brush. Now, one of my favorite, my favorite travel brush is a number 12 Cheap Joe's Pseudo Sable travel brush, and it is about the same size as this one. It had a razor sharp point, but after many years of using it in almost every plein air painting I did, it has gone really blunt. But that would do, I could do an entire painting with that brush, and that's what you're really looking for, especially when you're in a travel brush, I think, because your space is limited. What you're going to carry with you is limited. You don't want to lug tons of stuff, especially if you love to hike like I do. I want to hike, and I don't want to have a huge heavy backpack. I want to be carrying it as light as possible. Even if I'm not hiking that much, I am out in the summer a lot where it's hot and humid. I just don't want a huge heavy bag on me. So being able to wean down to a couple brushes is fantastic. And then learning how to use those bigger brushes so that you can get the most out of them is really, it's going to be so much better than going out and buying the perfect brush. You know, if you learn to use the brushes you have, that's going to pay off. And then when you do get a higher quality brush, you are going to find that it's just going to be so much easier, and you're going to get such great results. But you really just got to learn brush control first and foremost. You want to have good supplies, but you know, the best supplies you have are the ones you already have. The best supplies that are in your, how do I want to say that? Your best, I don't know what I want to say. Okay, I think I know what I want to say is the supplies you already have are the best ones you can use to make yourself a better artist today, because rather than driving to the store and buying the things or ordering the things and waiting till they come waiting for these perfect things to come before you can paint, just using what you have and getting to work with that's going to serve you so much better. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Learn to use what you have, and then figure out where the shortcomings might be if you want to upgrade, and then upgrade at that point. Because, the best people doing anything in their field, whether it's an athlete or it's an artist or it's a race car driver, they don't start off with top of the line. There's some of the best runners in the world start off running barefoot. They didn't have fancy sneakers. And using what you have, learning what those tools will do before you add more to your arsenal and add more variables and more confusion, learning to use what you already have is going to pay off so much more than buying more supplies. Trust me. And I want to say this during Prime days because it's going to be tempting, right? And I want you to feel good about your art, not feel like you need to have so many things just to create, because that's not fun. That's not fun to do. So now I'm letting the shading layer dry on the flowers, and I'm kind of just dancing around different parts of the picture, seeing what needs to be darkened. Like I said, we give our eyes a chance to rest on one area while we go and work on another area. And that's what I'm doing here. So, if I force myself to keep working on that flower, the main flower, I could overwork it, or I could end up putting so much detail on one petal, then I would have to do that to all the other petals, and it may not improve them. It may make it look too fussy. And this is a white flower after all, so I don't want to get it too dark. And you really need to let those colors dry before you're going to see the true color. Some colors shift dramatically when they dry. The wetter the wash, the more dramatic the shift is going to be. And because I did use some of the peach light, which is a fluorescent color, that is going to shift quite a bit as it dries. So we just want to make sure that we are judging it with fresh eyes. We're judging it on a dry state so that we know how it really is going to look. And I like this too, where I can go in and add details to other parts. It's kind of a fun time in a painting's life, is when you're about 90% done and you're putting in those final details and you're sharpening up edges where you need to sharpen them. Since that big leaf is kind of the most decorative leaf, I would say, we've got the holes in it, we've got the interesting serrations on the edge, I wanted to go in and put the veins in with my brush. And I use that big brush because it comes to a nice sharp point. Whereas on some of the other ones, I'll probably just leave the scrapings, the credit card scraping vines. I can sharpen up edges where I had a few of those leaves just kind of morphing together because it was just all wet at one time there. And this is where you just go and pick out some of the details. So on that, I put a few little hints at part of the veins on that one. I didn't want to put them all in, just kind of, I wanted there to be a step between the big leaf where I painted all the veins over the scrapings to the kind of supporting leaves in the background where I hardly did any. So we kind of want those variations of details so we can show depth, so we can show things further away from the eyes, smaller things that we can't see as much detail on. This is a still life, essentially. It's a botanical. It's all fairly close focus. We're not that, there's not that much difference between where the leaf is on the visual plane and where the flower is and where the leaves and back are. So you just got to be mindful of that so you don't flatten it all out, right? If we have everything in real sharp focus, then it's easy to flatten things out. On a botanical, that could be okay, especially like a scientific drawing or something, but I like to have a little bit more of an ephemeral quality to it, and I like to have some things kind of fading out. And you'll see I'm painting slower as I get to the end because I'm really stopping to think, how does this look? Is this the way I want to leave it? Do I want to do more? And taking time like that just to stand back, or even just taking a break and going and having a cup of tea and coming back, that stuff will help you so that you can really evaluate your work. Sometimes I want to go in and I'm like, oh, okay, those veins were maybe a little too dark and I want to brush over them and soften them. Or maybe I'm like, I need a little more shadow there. That's a little too flat. So let me just wet the area and I'll drip in some darker green and let it float out and then get a nice natural shadow that way. You'll identify places where you need more contrast. You may find some places where you need less contrast. That's a little harder to deal with if you've got too much contrast, because it usually means you have to darken something up to the darker thing or try to scrub away. So if you do kind of gently approach your subject and kind of work yourself around in different areas, then hopefully you won't take anything too far so that you have to scrub back. So this was very, very enjoyable to paint. I found that just with this approach of focusing on the painting and not trying to narrate at the same time, I was able to carefully consider each value of each petal and each brush stroke that I was putting down. And I hope that it wasn't too boring keeping everything in real time. I know there were, towards the end there, you could see my thinking moments where I'm not painting for a few seconds, but I also wanted you to kind of get a feel for how long a petal was sitting wet before I added other colors to it, just so you can kind of see how the paint behaves. I know it can be a little stressful when you are working on your painting, especially as you're getting to the last stages and things are looking good and you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm kind of afraid to add this next color. If you can kind of see how the paint looks when it's fresh, wet on the paper versus how it dries to a more subtle look in real time, I think that can be a little bit more more comforting and kind of give you a realistic idea. Now here I'm putting in some of the sharper darks on that that dead flower. It's the same thing. So we have the big flower that's alive, it's fresh, it's in full bloom. Then we've got the two dead ones at the top, and then we've got that one that's kind of in the middle. It's been losing petals, but it's still got a couple hanging on there. So it's just like with the leaves. We want to bridge it from like these, almost you're seeing like a stages of the flower's life in this. And I think that's really nice to show that progression. And it's nice for the composition. It's nice for just the thought of this painting and showing the rose in its different stages. So think beyond just the pretty picture. And when you're working from your old photographs are great, because you're working for something that hasn't been edited, hasn't been shot by a professional photographer, unless you are a professional photographer. You're seeing it how it really is, and then it's up to you to edit it how you want it to be and what's the story you want to tell. Even with a simple still life, you can tell a story. And I hope that you enjoyed this story, and I hope you give it a try. I want to thank you so much for watching this today. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Tell a friend, share it with your friends. I don't know. I do appreciate all of that. And until next time, happy crafting. Bye.